The day my billionaire husband asked me to leave quietly, he didn't know I already owned part of everything he was trying to take from me. The restaurant smelled expensive. Marcus had chosen it carefully, public enough that Victoria wouldn't make a scene, private enough that no one from the Tribune's society desk would overhear. 12 years, Victoria. He said her name the way he said everything lately, efficiently, like an item on a closing agenda. I've had Whitfield and Cross draw up terms. Generous terms. The Lincoln Park brownstone, $2 million in a settlement account. And we handle this like adults. Victoria was 44 years old. She had put herself through Northwestern's night program in accounting while working days at the front desk of Kane Development, had raised Marcus's son from his first marriage as her own, had sat beside hospital beds during 2 of his father's cardiac surgeries at Northwestern Memorial. She set down her water glass carefully, because her hands wanted to shake and she refused to let them. Is there someone else? That's not what this is about. That's not a no. He didn't answer. Outside the window, a CTA bus hissed past on Michigan Avenue, and Victoria watched its reflection slide across the glass like something she should have seen coming a long time ago. I want this handled with dignity, Marcus said. Quietly. No lawyers dragging this into the papers. You leave the house by the end of the month, we sign, everyone moves on. You've already decided this. I'm asking you to make it easy. Victoria almost laughed, a short, brittle sound that surprised them both. 12 years of quarterly board dinners, of holding his mother's hand through chemo, of building the Kane Foundation's literacy program from nothing into something that put 400 kids a year into after-school reading programs across the South Side. All of it reduced to make it easy. I'll think about it, she said, and stood, and walked out before her voice could break in front of him. She didn't cry in the car. She sat behind the wheel in the Le Colonial parking garage for 11 minutes, engine off, hands folded in her lap, and asked herself the only question that mattered. When exactly did I become someone he could schedule? She had no idea an envelope was already waiting for her 3 miles away. That would make sure she never had to ask that question again. To understand that dinner, you have to go back 28 years, to a construction trailer on Halsted Street where a 26-year-old developer named Marcus Kane was 2 weeks from losing everything. He had blueprints for a mixed-use building, retail below, apartments above, and no bank in Chicago willing to fund a kid with no track record. Walter Hart, a structural engineer who'd inspected 2 of Marcus's father's old projects back in the 80s, walked into that trailer to sign off on a permit. He remembered the boy who used to hang around job sites sketching floor plans nobody asked for. When Marcus admitted he needed $80,000 just to hold the land option, Walter didn't hesitate long. I've got $80,000, sitting in a savings account doing nothing, he said. You don't pay me back in cash. You pay me back by not becoming the kind of developer who forgets where he started. They shook hands. There was no lawyer in the room, just a handwritten stock certificate for founding shares in a company that didn't have a name yet. Marcus never forgot that morning. Not for years, anyway. What he didn't know was that Walter never sold, never cashed out, never mentioned it again. And that silence would end up costing Marcus everything he'd built. Victoria met Marcus 9 years later in 2007, when she answered a front desk job posting at Kane, Development's first real office above a bank on LaSalle Street. He noticed her the 3rd week, when she caught an accounting error that would have cost the company $60,000. Their early years were good ones. Marcus proposed at Promontory Point on a Tuesday. No ring box, just a ring in his coat pocket and the Chicago skyline behind them across the water. Victoria said yes before he finished the sentence. The distance came slowly. The way most marriages fail, not with a single betrayal, but with small withdrawals. Nobody bothered to notice compounding. It was the year Marcus's son, 10-year-old David, came to live with them full-time, and Victoria managed the transition alone while Marcus closed 2 acquisitions out of town. Home 4 nights out of every 14. It was the foundation Victoria built from nothing. The literacy program she ran 2 nights a week out of a South Side storefront, which Marcus attended exactly once, for a photo and never asked about again. The breaking point came the autumn David left for college. Victoria asked Marcus gently. Whether he still saw her as a partner in the company or just a partner in the house. You've never had to build anything from nothing, Marcus said. Tired. Not cruel. Just careless in the way exhausted people are careless. You don't know what this company cost me. Victoria didn't answer that night. She just filed it away, the way she'd learned to file most things away by then. She had no way of knowing. Her father had already made sure that silence wouldn't last forever. Walter Hart died in the spring of Victoria's 33rd year, in a hospice room on the north side. He was 74. He and Victoria's mother had lived in the same modest Portage Park bungalow for 31 years, and he drove a truck with 200,000 miles on it. He never once mentioned handing a stranger his family's entire life savings on a handshake. Victoria asked him about it exactly once, months before he died, after a news segment about Kane development played on the hospice television. Didn't you inspect some of Marcus's father's buildings back in the day? Walter watched the screen for a long moment. Knew the family, he said. Good people. Struggled hard. Then he changed the subject and Victoria let him. Because you don't push a dying man to talk about things he doesn't want to talk about. What she didn't know was that 4 months before that conversation, Walter had sat in Daniel Ferrante's office and drawn up instructions for a sealed envelope. He'd understood something about Marcus that Victoria, still inside the marriage, couldn't yet see. That ambition, left unchecked by memory, eventually forgets the people who made it possible. If I'm wrong about him, he told Ferrante, she'll never need to open it and no harm done. If I'm right, she'll need every page. He never told Victoria. He never told her mother. Walter just didn't believe in talking about a good deed. He believed in doing it and letting it wait. He was right to wait. It would take 11 years, but that envelope would end up mattering more than anything else he ever owned. 3 days after Le Colonial, Victoria sat in the waiting room of Hollis and Ferrante, a small estate law firm on LaSalle Street that her father had used for decades before his death. She hadn't set foot in the office since the funeral. She was here now only because the firm had mailed a certified letter. A sealed item from your father's estate requires your presence for opening, per the terms of his 2015 will. She'd assumed it was some sentimental keepsake, his old watch, maybe, or a box of letters. Grief made people sentimental about paperwork. Daniel Ferrante, gray-templed and precise, led her into a conference room and set a thick manila envelope on the table between them. Her father's handwriting covered the front. For Victoria, not to be opened until circumstances require it. Trust me on this, kid. Your father was specific, Ferrante said. He said this envelope was only to be opened if, quote, Marcus, Kane ever tries to walk her out the door like she was never part of the foundation. Those were his words. Mrs. Kane, he filed instructions with this office in 2015, a year before he passed. Victoria's pulse thudded in her ears. My father barely knew Marcus. Your father, Ferrante said, sliding the envelope toward her, knew a great deal more than you think. Inside were 3 things: a stock certificate, a handwritten ledger, and a letter in her father's careful engineering school print. The stock certificate was for 40,000 founding shares of Kane Development Group, dated 1998, 2 years before Marcus. Kane took the company public, and 11 years before Victoria ever walked into its lobby looking for a job. The name on the certificate was Walter J. Hart. Victoria stared at it. This has to be a mistake. My father was a structural engineer. He inspected buildings. He didn't invest in real estate companies. Read the letter, Ferrante said gently. Ellie, if you're reading this, it means Marcus finally showed you who he really is. And I'm sorry. I'm not there to see your face when you figure out what I did about it. Back in '98, young Marcus Kane came to me with blueprints for a mixed-use development on Halsted that no bank in Chicago would touch. I was the inspector of record on his father's old projects, and I believed in the kid before he believed in himself. I put in 80,000, every cent your mother and I had saved, and he gave me founding shares because he had no cash to pay me any other way. We shook hands. He told me I'd always have a seat at his table. I never touched those shares. Never sold, never diluted, never told anyone, not even you. Marcus asked me to keep it. Quiet back then because he didn't want investors to know his seed money came from a building. Inspector instead of a bank. Pride, I suppose. I let him have his pride because I liked the man he was trying to become. But shares like these don't disappear, kid. They compound. By my last count with Ferrante's help, your inheritance, if you ever need it, sits at just under 6% of Kane. Development group. Common stock, voting rights attached, never touched by any prenuptial agreement because it was never part of your marriage. It was mine and now it's yours. And it always has been, whether Marcus remembers it or not. I always hoped you'd never need this letter. If you're reading it, hold your head up. You don't have to leave anything quietly. Not that house. Not that company. Not your dignity. I love you always. Dad. Victoria sat frozen, the letter trembling slightly in her fingers. The first time she'd let herself shake all week. That night she didn't sleep. She sat at the kitchen island of the Lincoln Park brownstone. The ledger spread out under the range hood light, tracing her father's handwriting like it might. Answer questions he'd never lived to. Answer out loud. She thought about every dinner where Marcus had. Talked about building the company alone. She thought about the framed magazine, cover in his office, the self-made empire of Marcus Kane, and wondered how many people in that boardroom had known the truth and simply never. Corrected the record because it flattered everyone to let the myth stand. She didn't confront Marcus, not yet. Ferrante had been clear. The moment he knows you know, he has time to prepare a defense. Right now, you have the only advantage you'll ever get. Surprise. Over the next 11 days, Victoria uncovered 3 things Marcus never expected her to find. At the Harold Washington Library Center, she pulled Kane Development's Archived Incorporation, papers, and found the company's original 1998 filing listed. 3 founding contributors by initials, only, never named, never explained. A retired bookkeeper named Carol Jennings, who'd handled the company's books in its earliest years, confirmed she remembered. Walter Hart calling twice a year just to ask how the company was doing, never once asking about his shares. And a forensic accountant Ferrante hired, Priya Nadeja, confirmed the shares had never been diluted or acknowledged in any public filing since the Tatan IPO, real, valid, and completely undisclosed. Then on day 8, the first scare. Priya's inquiry triggered a compliance flag inside. Kane Development's own systems. And Preston Voss called Ferrante directly, cordial but probing, asking why an outside accountant wanted decades-old filings. Ferrante gave him nothing. But he told Victoria that night, they know someone's looking. We may have days, not weeks. That same week, Victoria came home to find Marcus already at the dining table, going through a box of old company photos he never usually touched. He didn't look up. Just feeling nostalgic, he said. Victoria smiled and said nothing. But her pulse didn't slow down until she was alone in the bathroom with the door locked, wondering exactly how much he already suspected. On day 10, Victoria nearly lost her nerve. Sitting across from Marcus at breakfast, wondering if she should just take the settlement and walk away, Ferrante slid her father's own words across his desk instead. You don't have to leave anything quietly. And she didn't waver again. By day 11, the valuation report was complete. Mrs. Kane, Ferrante told her, I think it's time we requested a meeting with your husband's counsel. It took Ferrante's team a further 11 days to prepare a full shareholder disclosure motion. Through all of it, Victoria did something Marcus would never have expected. She said nothing. She signed nothing. She kept showing up at foundation board meetings, kept reading with second graders at a school on 63rd Street every Thursday, kept behaving exactly as she always had, while quietly gathering copies of every financial document she could legally access as a Kane Development Board Observer, a ceremonial title Marcus had given her years ago as a favor that had never mattered until now. The confrontation happened not at a restaurant, but in Marcus's own conference room on the 47th floor of the Kane Development Tower on Wacker Drive, glass walls looking out over the bend of the Chicago River. Marcus had brought his general counsel, a sharp, tired man named Preston Voss, expecting to finalize a quiet divorce settlement. Instead, Ferrante slid the stock certificate across the table. Marcus had no idea that single piece of paper was about to unravel 26 years of the story he'd told, everyone about himself. Marcus went pale in a way Victoria had never seen in 12 years of marriage. Where did you get that? My father gave it to me, Victoria said. 11 years ago. You just didn't know it yet. Voss picked up the certificate, turned it over, and his jaw tightened. This is real, he said quietly, almost to himself. This is from before the company even went public. You knew, Victoria said to Marcus. It wasn't a question. Marcus's silence lasted 8 long seconds. I forgot, he finally said. Walter never cashed out, never asked for a dividend. Never. I genuinely forgot the shares existed, Victoria. That was 2 lifetimes ago. You forgot my father owns part of your company, Victoria said. And you never told the public he did. That's not forgetting, Marcus. That's hiding. And hiding it is against the law. Voss set the certificate down like it had grown hot in his hands. Marcus, we need to talk privately. They didn't get privacy. Victoria stayed exactly where she was. I'm not the woman you asked to leave quietly, she said. I'm a shareholder now with counsel. And a ledger your own filings never mentioned. Settle this with me as your wife? Quietly. Or settle it with me as an investor in front of the board. Your choice. But it isn't going to be quiet either way. Marcus's hands flattened against the glass table, as though he needed it to hold him up. 26. Years of careful reputation had just cracked open in front of his own lawyer. What do you want? He said. Not I'm sorry. Just the practical question of a man calculating damage. The truth on the record. The foundation protected, and my father's name where it should have been in 2000. Voss cleared his throat. Given what's on this table, we may not have a choice about that regardless. Marcus looked at Victoria for a long moment, and something in his face shifted. Not remorse exactly, but recognition, as if he were seeing an entirely different woman than the one he'd tried to hand a settlement check to at La Coloniale. That night, alone in a downtown hotel room he'd booked instead of going home, Marcus called Voss at 11:30 and asked him a single question. Is there any way to make this go away quietly? Voss's answer was the first honest thing anyone had told Marcus in a week. No. And honestly, Marcus, I don't think you should want there to be. He was right. What was coming couldn't be stopped, only faced. The story broke in Crane's Chicago business 6 weeks later, not because Victoria leaked it, but because the law finally forced Marcus's hand. Kane Development was required to publicly correct the record. A hidden founding shareholder, never disclosed in 26 years. Within a week, a reporter had connected that shareholder to Victoria Kane, and from there to her late father, Walter Hart, the building inspector, who once bet his family's entire savings on a young developer nobody else believed in. The board convened an emergency session at the Kane Development Tower. Victoria attended, not as Marcus's wife, but as a shareholder of record, sitting at the far end of the long table with Ferrante beside her, while board members who had ignored her for a decade now addressed her directly for the first time. Diana Castellano, the board's longest-serving independent director and the one member who had quietly pushed back against Marcus's expansion decisions for years, didn't bother hiding her satisfaction. I've been asking this board for 3 years to get an independent audit of founder-era equity, she said, looking directly at Marcus. I was told there was nothing to find. There wasn't, as far as I knew, Marcus said. And for once it sounded like the truth, rather than a defense. Another director, a younger man named Thomas Ridley, who owed his board seat to Marcus's personal recommendation, tried to steer the conversation toward containment, a quiet settlement, a non-disclosure agreement, language about historical administrative oversight. Victoria watched. Marcus consider it. She watched him not take it. Marcus stood at the head of the table and did something Victoria had genuinely not expected. He told the truth without being forced to in front of everyone. Walter Hart believed in me when the banks wouldn't return my calls, he said, voice rougher than his usual boardroom cadence. I built this company on his money and his trust, and somewhere along the way I convinced myself the story sounded better if I'd done it alone. That was wrong. It was wrong when I let it happen in 2000, and it was wrong 3 months ago when I asked my wife, his daughter, to walk out of our marriage quietly, as if she'd never been part of any of this. She was always part of it. She just didn't know how much. Ridley's containment plan died in the silence that followed. Castellano moved that the board formally recognize Walter Hart as a founding contributor in all future public materials, retroactive to the 2000 filing. It passed 8 votes to 1, Ridley's. After the vote, the room emptied slowly, board members lingering in small, uncertain clusters the way people do after a funeral, unsure whether it's appropriate to talk about anything else yet. Marcus stayed behind. So did Victoria. For a moment, it was just the two of them at the long table, the Chicago River bending silver-brown below the glass, the city going on about its evening the way it always did, indifferent to what had just happened 47 floors above it. "I used to practice that speech," Marcus said quietly, not looking at her. "The self-made version. I gave it so many times I started believing it myself. I think somewhere in there I forgot it wasn't true before I ever decided to lie about it." "That's not an apology," Victoria said. "No," Marcus agreed. "I don't think I've earned the right to give you one yet. I just wanted you to know I heard myself say it out loud today, for the first time in 20 years, and it didn't feel like relief. It felt like finally putting down something heavy. I didn't know I'd been carrying." Victoria studied him for a long moment. Not the boardroom version of him. Not the husband who'd asked her to leave quietly, but something closer to the 26-year-old in a cold construction trailer who'd once needed a stranger to believe in him before he believed in himself. She didn't forgive him. Not there, not that day. But she let herself see him clearly one last time before she gathered her folder and walked out to the elevator alone. It wasn't absolution. Victoria didn't offer Marcus any that day, but she watched 20 years of a carefully built myth come apart in real time. And she felt something she hadn't expected to feel. Not triumph, but a kind of grief for the marriage that might have been, if Marcus had told this truth a decade earlier instead of needing a lawsuit to drag it out of him. The divorce was finalized 8 months later in Cook County Circuit Court, no shouting, in a marble hallway. Just 2 lawyers, 2 signatures, and a settlement that looked nothing like the terms Marcus had proposed at Le Colonial. Victoria kept her shares, now voting in her own name, no longer a footnote in someone else's marriage. She used the founding stake to build the Walter Hart Reading Initiative, an independent nonprofit 2 blocks from the school where she still reads with second graders every Thursday, funded in part by dividends from a stock certificate that had sat in a drawer for over a decade waiting to matter. Within a year, it had grown to 3 sites across the South Side. David, now 26, flew back for the ribbon cutting and told a room full of donors that his stepmother had taught him more about showing up than either of his actual parents had. On the first anniversary of the settlement, Victoria drove out to Graceland Cemetery, where her father was buried under a plain granite marker he'd chosen himself. No mention of Kane development anywhere on it. She sat on the grass beside the stone and told him out loud that the company had finally put his name back where it belonged. "You always said the truth finds its way home," she said. "Took 11 years, but you were right." Driving back into the city that evening, windows down, the lake turning silver under a September sky, Victoria understood something her father had known long before she did. Some inheritances aren't measured in dollars. Walter Hart left her a stock certificate, but what he really left her was the certainty that a person's worth was never something someone else got to decide for her, quietly or otherwise. She never left quietly. She left clearly.